Welcome to Good Game, your no BS insights for crypto founders.
Pretty much always definitely get an audit. It's just not worth it. It's just hard to think of a case where an audit doesn't make sense. You want to go from like a reputable auditor, right? So you have Code Arena is great, Cantina is great, Chainlight is great, Trail of Bits is great. Just always get an audit. This is a space where if something works, it can work extremely quickly, right? I think in the case of like Munchables, right? It's like, it was within a few days, 100 million TVL.
Looking for your next startup idea in crypto? Check out our request for startups list and get inspired at alliance.xyz/ideas. Welcome to Good Game. Today we have Pacman on, founder of Blur and Blast, to talk a bit about what he has learned as a founder, some of the new apps that are being built on Blast, what he's learned from the recent breach of security by Munchables, and then more importantly, what are some founder lessons that he's learned throughout the whole process. Qiao, what do you want to talk about? What are some things that you want to touch on?
Exactly what you said.
All right, let's get started. Pacman, obviously everyone pretty much knows who you are and your background. So I want to learn more about Blur. Obviously, Blur's been around for a while now. I mean, I use it as my main platform for NFTs on Ethereum. When you first launched Blur, let's say a year and a half ago, a year ago, is it all what you hoped?
Yeah, I would say progress so far has been, I would say surpassed expectations. Yeah. Although as like a general like operating principle, I don't try to set like explicit expectations. It's more so, like we think that this will work generally and then we see what the results will be. Like directionally, definitely like met expectations. And then in terms of like the specific, outcomes, I would say surpassed.
When you first launched it, were you thinking about, I mean, obviously there was some competition with OpenSea, but this was also a kind of a newer market segment because you were targeting pro traders. But the impact was actually pretty big. OpenSea ended up losing a lot of its customers to Blur. I guess, generally speaking, was that something that you thought in the back of your mind that was going to happen? Like you were going to head on compete with OpenSea? What do you think about like OpenSea's strategy overall?
Yeah, I think that the thing about Blur that's really interesting is that it's, well, one, like building like a dApp and like a protocol, it's like different than like a traditional startup. Anyways, just like inherently, it's like Web2 versus Web3, like those are different things. But even outside of that, it was very different than like a traditional startup in that like normally in traditional startups, the story is like you launch something quickly, you iterate, you pivot, maybe you completely switch ideas. And there's like many stories of really successful Web2 startups that, kind of had that sort of trajectory. The thing that was different about Blur was that basically the entire project from day one was already kind of like planned, like from like prior to day one. We knew exactly what we wanted to build. We knew exactly how we wanted to build it, how we wanted to launch it. Even the points system was something that, we wanted to implement, prior to day one of starting on it. So, in terms of like when we kind of officially started working on it, it was January 2022. We launched Blur publicly October 2022. And literally even prior to January 2022, we knew that it was NFT marketplace for pro traders. There was going to be a point system. Nothing changed about that. And we knew that it was targeting an underserved segment in the market. And we knew that if we were successful, it was going to like capture the market or at least like a large share of the market. So I think the thing that was like really atypical about Blur was it was just kind of just like a straight arrow that went through the market. And the reason why we had so much conviction that it would work was just because the impetus for Blur came from my own experience as an NFT trader. I personally got into NFTs. I actually minted a Blipmap as my first NFT and I minted it for like $300, something like that. It's because an acquaintance of mine, Worm Emoji, actually, I knew him IRL from YC previously, and he was like in a group chat and was like, "Hey, I'm working on this project. You guys should check it out." And then I was like, you know what, why not? I'll like mint this NFT. Minted it for like $300 and then ended up selling it for like 25, 30 ETH at the time. I was somewhere around that range. And then after that, I was just completely hooked and I really fell in love with trading NFTs. Wrote some scripts to try to analyze metadata quickly before like the reveals and, did some arbitrage stuff. And I was just really in love with the trading side of NFTs specifically. And, as a user myself, I realized that the infrastructure for NFTs was like really bad, where the existing tools at the time, if you remember, it was just like, there were multiple different tools. OpenSea was like crashing all the time. It was like very, very slow and clunky. It was very painful to use. And I was spending like a lot of time on these tools. And I was just like, man, this is like a really suboptimal experience. I wanted something better myself personally. So I knew that, just given that I wasn't like a particularly unique trader in that sense, I knew that if we built something better for my kind of user, that it would do quite well.
So you pretty much built Blur from first principles, right? Going through what any user journey would go through to learn about what was broken within crypto and being able to kind of build that wedge into the market. Now let's fast forward to where we are today. There's a lot of reception around the impact Blur's made, both positive and some people may argue some negative. And so I want to touch on a few things. One is, there's a part of the community within NFTs that believes that NFTs shouldn't be traded. They should be kind of like held, like maybe I'm thinking about the art blocks community and some of the other parts of the community within NFTs. But then there's a part that just wants to make money and trade. And so how do you like balance the two out when you're thinking about building these types of products? Obviously, like we're in crypto and financialization, speculation is incredibly important in what we do. But how do you like address that crowd when you're thinking about where you are today?
Yeah, totally. The first thing is that I wouldn't really think of it as a binary. It's like you're like a trader or collector / community member.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap, and it's kind of like a spectrum. Like some, even like diehard collectors, like some of them will flip once in a while, or they'll sell something where they're like, once they don't have much conviction. And similarly, like traders, even the most like avid traders, flippers, like they'll probably have a PFP or two that they kind of just like want to hold on to forever and are just kind of like down to hold on to forever, and they don't care about the price. So actually there's like a little bit of both in everyone. And it's really just kind of like a spectrum. So I think actually the overlap is the thing that was hard to predict early on, but it ended up being that there was like a very large overlap. And I think that's why Blur captured such a large segment of the user base. And in terms of like how we think about it, we really, from the builder side, we really prioritize the core user base, which is going to be the traders. So there are aspects of Blur that I think we can improve, especially on the aggregator side, that we can improve for like collectors as well. And that's definitely like something that we want to do. But it's hard to build for two different like profiles at the same time. Like even just making the product work. If you look at Blur, it's like very, very data heavy, right? It's like very data intensive. If you're a newbie going on to Blur, it's probably going to be intimidating. But the thing is, if you're like an experienced trader, like that's not intimidating. That's like the most like valuable information that you could have like at your fingertips. So it's interesting because it's like, it's very polarizing based on that user base. It's hard to build something that's like perfect for everyone. So for us, it's like, that's always been our bread and butter is serving the traders. And so, that's always probably going to be our focus. Although I think it's possible to diversify and serve multiple segments. It's a difficult challenge. And even in that world, we're still just like always going to be making sure that the core trader base is served.
Got it. And that kind of wedges into the point system. Obviously, points has become the meta for crypto today. And I think it all started with Blur. I guess, there's been great things about points, and there's also been some negative things said about points. There's value extractive actors that are in the space that are always looking for ways to extract maximum value, whether it's Sybil attacks, whether it's wash trading, etc. So I'm curious on like, what are some of the things that you've learned as you implement the point system, the good and the bad? Yeah, maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that I've learned is that any good system or mechanism, especially in like a financialized space, which is, the crypto is financialized at its core, especially in a financialized space, anything that works is also going to be co-opted by grifters, or maybe not straight up grifters, but just like adversarial actors. Like it's just going to be co-opted, and that's just like always going to happen. I think a great example of this is if you look at ICOs, right? Like ICOs actually at their core are kind of phenomenal. It's like it allows retail to participate in this like new product formation, and they get like maximum upside. Ethereum was launched via an ICO, and it was one of the greatest wealth creation events, in history. I think it arguably gave it the user base that, was like that hot core that allowed it to succeed. But of course, after Ethereum, there was the whole 2017 era of ICOs where there was like way more rugs and scams than there were like legit projects. And it's just because like it worked so well for Ethereum, it was always going to be co-opted in that way. Even just like Bitcoin using a white paper, right? It's like there was a long time where like every project that launched had a white paper. Even if it didn't need a white paper, it had a white paper because it was like, oh, this is like Bitcoin. And, Bitcoin was successful and had a white paper, so now we're going to launch our own white paper and seem legit. So any like good system will always be co-opted. And similarly for points, what I've seen is that there are some cases for where it's very, very helpful. But what I've also seen is it also kind of gets co-opted from projects that are kind of effectively like farming the farmers, where they will create a point system that basically will lead the users to transfer money from their wallets to the project's wallets. And they are like very vague about the timeline, and they extend it, and they basically just like farm the farmers and drain the users' liquidity. And so like that's obviously like a very that's a bad point system, right? And it's gonna kind of color the entire mechanic, just like the 2017 ICOs colored ICOs a little bit improperly, in my perspective. Like I actually think ICOs are really phenomenal if used correctly, but like it's just always going to get co-opted. So that's something that I'm seeing more of now, that the points system is kind of more commonly regarded as a good mechanic.
The NFT markets have been kind of slower recently, especially on Ethereum, given all the excitement around layer 2s, etc. Layer 2s and Memecoins, right? And so there's a couple new metas that come out of this. One is NFT projects airdropping tokens. So like MFers is a great example. Many others like Book of Meme, etc. It seems to me that the meta is now moving to tokens versus just NFTs only. And there's another, I don't know if you've heard about the whole 404 that recently popped up, tokenizing NFTs. You have like Flooring Protocol that's also tokenizing NFTs. To me, it seems like there needs to be some sort of mix between NFTs and tokens, both from a liquidity perspective and then also obviously for holding the actual NFT. So where do you see this all go?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of surprising to me how long it took for this meta to progress, because it worked so well for ApeCoin and Yuga, like so well, right? They launched in multiple collections and then launched a token to all the holders. Like that did extremely well. I would have thought that project would have started doing this sooner. And I think it took like over 12 months before you really started seeing it like pick up steam. And now every project's launching their own token. It always seemed like the direction that things would go regardless, because, I think in the early days, as the NFT movement kind of started, there was actually not a lot of overlap between NFTs and DeFi. So like everything was all happening on the same chain, right? It was like mostly on Ethereum, and NFTs were really picking up. And you had DeFi, just like they were kind of just these like parallel tracks, and there wasn't very much overlap. And it was very obvious to me especially when we got started building or looking at the different players in the NFT space, it was very obvious that a lot of the players did not have any exposure to DeFi. So even the whole idea of, having a NFT like protocol that's tokenized and incorporating like DeFi mechanics, like that was all like very, very novel, even from like a marketplace perspective. But given how powerful it is to be able to utilize some of these DeFi primitives, it just seemed a natural end conclusion that all of these NFT projects and the NFT founders would also start to incorporate DeFi into their projects. This is like a financialized space, and DeFi does provide primitives that you can build with. So it's just like if these primitives exist and they're useful, they're going to be used at the end of the day. It's just like kind of inevitable. I think the reason why it took so long is because there was like a difference in skill set, right? Like the skill it takes to develop an NFT project, at least very much in the early days, is different than the skill it takes to develop a DeFi protocol. And actually like the combination of those is quite rare to have in like a single team. So I think that kind of just naturally led to a delay in terms of this like meta developing.
Do you think 404s are here to stay, or was it a flash in the pan?
I think it's really hard to predict these kinds of things. Like when it comes to specific things taking off, I think it's really, really hard to predict. I could basically see arguments, like reasonable arguments for both ways. I think in the current form, it doesn't seem to me that people who like trade the 404s like to like collect the 404s. Like I haven't really seen as much collecting going on, but I think that if they're like, I would not be surprised if there is like an iteration of a 404, or maybe it's just like a specific implementation of 404 in terms of like the execution that basically makes it so that like, yes, you can trade the token and fractionalize it, or you can also collect the NFT. And actually there's like a premium for like collecting the NFT. Right now I feel like there's like not really a premium. And so as long as there isn't really a premium, I don't really think it's going to be particularly effective. But I don't think, like, I think it's very possible to execute on a 404 project in such a way such that there is a premium for like collecting the NFT itself. And I think whoever cracks that will probably, see a great deal of success, because I think that will be like a very novel, execution of the concept.
I'm curious what your mental model is for meme coins and NFTs, because last cycle NFTs were all the rage, and this cycle meme coins, at least for now, stole the spotlight from NFTs. And for traders, at least, I think they're fundamentally the same. They're both meme coins. NFTs are meme coins with a very high floor price, but the fact that those fungible meme coins are taking off, partly I think is because the unit price bias, like the retail can't afford it.
Yeah.
Curious what you think.
I think there's a few different dimensions to this. One is there's always, something I've noticed in this space is like there's always a attention and capital rotation. Typically what I've seen is like, you have like the majors, and then you have like the alts, and then later in the cycle, then you have the NFTs and some other types of games effectively. So like there's always been this sort of like capital rotation. So in terms of like the attention shifting, it's always hard to, the real answer is probably like a combination of everything, but it's always hard to really pinpoint like the exact underlying reason. I think a lot of the attention shifting over to meme coins right now just seems to me like fairly natural, and it was something that would have expected. But I do think that for a lot of traders, if you're like purely financially motivated, like it doesn't matter between the two of them, right? But like I said in the beginning, what I've noticed is that even in like the NFT traders, and there are of course many who also trade like meme coins, even in those people, like there's also like aspects of like collectors in them. And I think in pretty much like every human on earth, like there's an aspect of like we kind of collecting things, we like kind of showing things off for clout. NFTs still provide some of those non-financial dimensions. I think that you just don't get, like, you don't really have someone flexing their, I guess you do have some people like flexing their like portfolio, but it's just like not really the same, like flexing your like bag of Doge or whatever compared to like putting your PFP on your profile and like flexing that way. And then also in terms of just like the community that kind of develops, I have seen that NFT communities, they seem a little bit more like bought in than I've seen in token communities. All that is to say is that I think that it makes sense to me that like attention is on pure play like tokens right now, but I would be surprised if that's just like current state in terms of like, it's probably like 90% tokens right now and like 10% NFTs in terms of like the attention share. It would be surprised to me if that's like the forever state. I would expect something to shift more to be even in the future. But I think a lot of that also just kind of like depends on the developments. Because like you said, there is this inherent limitation with NFTs, at least with the, the 10K PFP collections, and that as soon as the collection starts becoming valuable, it's like 2 ETH NFT or 3 ETH NFT, which isn't like that crazy high. That's like $10,000, right? And that's like really unaffordable for like pretty much everyone. So I think there's like an inherent limitation on that front. Although I think with L2 NFTs, like potentially like larger collection sizes, I think we could probably see a little bit more experimentation than we've been able to see on ETH L1. But yeah, there are like different dynamics at play for sure.
You said something that I think is spot on, which is that it's not binary between collectors and traders. It's a spectrum. And in fact, I noticed there's quite a few PFPs on my timeline that have a hat. So it's very similar to the NFT collectors putting their NFTs as PFP.
Yeah, the hat is very interesting because it's kind of like the laser eyes. It's like, it is kind of co-opting some of like the NFT community mechanics dynamics. Maybe there's a world where it's like, that is a good mental model for like how to design a good like meme token, is if people can somehow use it as like a PFP. The hat is so ubiquitous, right? If anytime I see that beanie, I'm definitely thinking of like, it's similar to like laser eyes. So yeah, they're very similar in that regard.
Recently, you obviously like Blast launched about a couple months ago. I think there's some really great things that happened that hasn't happened on a lot of layer twos. And that is like new types of products that enable new types of behavior. So an example of this is I was a pretty big fan of Baseline. I thought that was very interesting. YOLO was another interesting product. Crypto Valleys obviously was a take on another product. And so I guess like how did you like maybe talk about like how you curated these types of startup founders to come up with these types of ideas? Like what was the thinking behind like the Blast competition?
Yeah.
And the types of startups? Yep.
I would say we didn't really explicitly curate
So
so much as
here's like an example. Qiao and I have talked about it. We've seen this on Twitter, but if you compare all the layer twos to cities, they have a unique property, right? So base is similar to, say, San Francisco. People have said Blast is similar to like Vegas. And so I feel like there's a certain type of DNA that comes into that's infused with layer twos that bring up these types of products. So I'm curious on one of your thought of that. Was that like intentional?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a combination of things. The first was, the impetus for Blast in the first place. Blast wasn't something that I had like set out to build. I was like very happy contributing to Blur and NFTs, going and starting up an entire new project and contributing to two at the same time. It was just like, that was not like a job that I originally like wanted to sign up for. The reason why my co-founder and I felt it was necessary was because as we were digging into the layer twos on the Blur side, right? So we were looking for different layer twos where we thought that it was a very interesting future for NFTs, and we took a look at them. We took a look at them from a technical perspective. We also talked with other BD teams and their founders as well, and we were fortunate to be able to connect with many of them. And when we dug into it, we found that there wasn't much differentiation. And from a builder perspective, there wasn't actually anything that they were presenting that like particularly resonated with us. It didn't really seem like we could do anything new on the layer twos. It seemed like it was like we could do more of the same, maybe like faster and cheaper, but that was like kind of it. And it just didn't seem like particularly compelling. So that was kind of one of the impetuses for this. The other impetus, and this was just kind of just being in the space and kind of following along with DeFi, the thing that we realized was there was just like a very large market inefficiency that existed. Similar to for Blur, when we launched, there was also very large market inefficiency in the NFT market in terms of pro traders like not being served. So we saw a similar market inefficiency in layer twos, and that the baseline rate of interest on all these layer twos was effectively 0%. But what's possible is actually to raise the baseline interest rate on the layer two to around 3 to 4% for ETH, and to greater than 5% for the stablecoin. So this was something that was kind of like shocking for us to realize, because it seems like such like a simple thing and it's like a very small thing, but like even just like changing the baseline interest rate a few bips is like how the Fed kind of controls inflation. So it's like very, very impactful. It's like very, very important. And the fact that like none of the layer twos were really taking advantage of it was just to us like, okay, there's like, people are losing money when they could otherwise be making money. Like on Blast now, even just with like the current TVL, the users just at a baseline level are earning around 100, 130 million in interest per year, just like by default, that they wouldn't have otherwise been earning. So there's this very large inefficiency. And then once we dug into and started thinking about it, the other thing is that we realized, or this is not a realization, it was more of a motivation, but this baseline interest rate would also allow us to solve problems that we had experienced personally at Blur, which is Blur has had this bid pool, which has had, over like 100 million in TVL in it for pretty much like most of its inception. And this bid pool that's just like sitting in the pool contract, the ETH could be earning yield. But when we dug into it, we realized it was kind of infeasible to implement this because there's just like a number of reasons. But if you actually try to like make a bid pool that's like on ETH L1 earn yield, is just from a technical perspective, like very, very difficult. And in some cases, it's kind of like downright impossible. So it's just like infeasible for us to like tap into that yield. And that yield is cool because it could be used to, fund creators. It could be used as like a revenue source to fund ongoing development. It's just like money that's kind of just like sitting there, and we weren't able to take advantage of it. And so, the cool thing about the yield is that it does enable new types of applications. So I think a lot of like the culture that is on Blast, one, it kind of just like arises from just like what is technically possible. That's like the first piece of it. The other piece of it is we were very deliberate in terms of like who we wanted to onboard. For us, and this is probably just more so due to like my own personal interests as like a user in the on-chain economy. But the people that I think are the best users in the entire space are the degens. These are the people who are risking their capital on chain. They're trying out new protocols. They're the people that even after FTX collapsed were actively trading NFTs and trading meme coins on chain. The non-degens weren't really doing that. It was the degens because they're the ones that actually like really are just so integrated in the on-chain economy. So those were, to us, always the people that we wanted to attract the most. Now, a lot of other layers, I think, have different perspectives and they kind of target different audiences. A lot of them are also like more academic and maybe some of them are more like institutional. And those are like totally fine user bases to target and probably extremely valuable user bases to target. But for us, we really just want to create this thriving on-chain economy that was providing new experiences to the end users using this native yield. And to us, the best way to accomplish that was to target the degens.
I'm really surprised that meme coins didn't really take off on Blast. Like 2 months ago, I put out a tweet and I said, I can see Blast really dominating the front page of Dex Screener. And that didn't happen. And what happened was Base was the one where the meme coins took off among the layer twos, of course, after Solana. What happened there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a few aspects of this. One is the thing that I've noticed, especially about chains, it's very hard to predict the trajectory of things, right? Like even Solana, it was like all the rage for a period, and then it was like dead for a period where like nothing was working on the chain. Like VCs were investing, like none of the tokens were popping off. And then Solana Moon, and then suddenly like everything was working on the chain again. And after everyone had written it off, even Base kind of had this trajectory where it was like really crushing it early on and then bald rugged. And then that kind of just like took a lot of the steam out. And even Friendtech kind of like died out as well. And there was like nothing on it for a bit. And then I think recently with like Barcaster and Degen, then it like popped off again. So a lot of this stuff is like very, very hard to predict. But one of the things that I think contributed to the current state on Blast is actually the incentive system actually provides a headwind for assets on Blast, because the way the current system is set up is that you earn points for holding ETH and USDT, and you can also earn gold for using dApps. But as soon as you hold any other asset, right, whether it's like a meme coin or governance token or literally anything else, you're no longer earning anything. And so it actually disincentivizes that behavior. This is one of the interesting things about designing any incentive system is that the emergent behaviors, especially if it's something that's complex, right? If it's like a simple product, you don't really have to worry about these things. But if it's something that's complex, like as complex as like incubating a new layer, there's all these like emergent behaviors that can come out from the incentive system that you then have to like think through and solve. So I think currently that's something that is actually basically like artificially holding back the token economy on Blast, because if you look at Blast, it's like there's like $2.5 billion of liquidity on it with like the most active on-chain user base that kind of like exists in the space, or at least like in like Ethereum land. So it's like, it's kind of like the gunpowder is there and like the match is there, but it's just like the fire is kind of being put out, I think, artificially because of disincentive that currently exists. That is something that like we are actively working to solve. And we have like literally just yesterday, we have a mechanism that we are like very excited about. I can't really touch on it right now, but basically just what I can touch on is the current problem, which is there is that headwind effectively.
That's very interesting. And it makes a lot of sense. Aside from meme coins, yield, what are some of the other applications or use cases that are unique that only exist on Blast that you're really excited about?
So there's a number of things. One is the thing that I was always the most excited about as like a baseline is more so just Blast enabling new business models. So the thing that I think is really interesting is like, if you take like a perp dex, for example, if you have a perp dex, most of these perp dexes have like a lot of TVL, right? They'll have tens of millions or even, in some cases, like hundreds of millions of TVL, across like the different perp dexes that exist across like all the chains. And those perp dexes, they currently charge like trading fees, which is like a perfectly reasonable way of earning revenue. But another way of earning revenue, another business model that exists is that they could actually just monetize the yield and actually either reduce or zero out the trading fees. And this is like a small and simple change. It can actually be quite impactful in the same way that Robinhood, they launched their like zero trading fee like stock app. And that had profound impacts on the rest of the world, right? Like it basically allowed like Wall Street bets to become a thing and completely changed like stock trading. So these like small business model tweaks can actually be like very impactful. That's something that I'm really excited to see develop on Blast. I don't think we've like seen it really develop just yet, but the building time for these things is quite long. So it's not surprising to me that it's still developing. One of the things that was already launched that actually I was really excited about, and it was unfortunate that it kind of floundered due to technical reasons, was Munchables, actually. Yeah. Munchables was a really cool project because it was both like a technical innovation and also a bit of a business model innovation in that it wasn't a mint that you explicitly like paid for. It was a mint that you basically locked up your funds for like 30 days. And then you were able to mint the NFT. This project went from like 0 TVL to like 100 million TVL in like 3 days or something like that. It was definitely like less than like 5 days. I need to check the exact numbers, but it basically went from like 0 to 100 million like instantly. And I think a lot of the excitement was because it's like this new model for minting NFTs that actually is interesting enough. It's kind of similar to how like rent works in Korea. I don't know if you guys know this, but in Korea, you don't actually rent by like paying a monthly rent like you do like in America and probably most of the rest of the world. You rent by depositing a pool of capital, and then the owner basically collects the interest. And then when you leave, you get to take the capital back. So it's actually like, it's kind of like the Munchables mechanic, but for like renting. And it's just like how it's done in Korea. And it's kind of this like really cool model. I thought that was basically going to create a new meta. I think it still will, but similar to like bald rugging, I think Munchables getting compromised basically like took a lot of steam out from that meta. But I think that it's, my personal, if you were to ask me like personally, again, like it's really hard to predict these things, but my personal view is that will be a meta that develops in the future because I don't know, it's just like a very cool mechanic. It allows people to mint things without really like, risking capital in a way that wasn't really feasible before. So that's something I was particularly excited about.
Do you guys remember there was an on-chain lottery project from many years ago where people put some money into the smart contract, and then at the end of the period, there's a lottery.
No loss.
But the lottery comes from the yield that was generated from that pool of money.
Yeah, pulled together, right?
Yeah, pulled together. Yeah,
pull together.
Yeah, I always thought it was an really interesting mechanic.
Yeah.
Maybe we could touch on Munchables. I know recently, as you mentioned earlier, Munchables went through a security breach. Every founder that's building crypto, it's one thing that they never want to ever experience. But you had to within the first 2 months of launching Blast. And so I guess, how did you, what was the process like once you were told that there was a breach? And what were the things that you did right, maybe wrong? What are the things that you tell founders to do moving forward?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to generalize advice here because from a layer level, it's different than from an individual dApp level. If you're an individual dApp that gets compromised, the behaviors are going to be very different than if you're contributing to a layer and then a dApp on the layer gets compromised. dApps on layers, dApps on every chain get compromised all the time. And there's been many, many larger hacks that have occurred for dApps on various different layers, right? Whether it's Arbitrum or Optimism or Solana or Ronin or Ethereum, right? There's been numerous dApp hacks. So from our perspective, from a layer level, this is something that, at the end of the day, these open ecosystems that anyone can go and participate and deploy on. And it's kind of this open playground in a way. So from a layer, typically what I've noticed, it's if a dApp gets hacked on Ethereum, it's not Vitalik is stepping in. Actually, I guess that's not true, right? Because there's the DAO. Yeah. So, basically in the limit, when a dApp gets hacked, the layer is not going to get involved in any way. And I think I don't know the Arbitrum Foundation's policies or the Optimism Foundation's policies, but I would imagine that when hacks happen on those layers, that they don't really get involved. And similarly on the Blast side for the contributors, our policy is that this is an open ecosystem and that it's kind of just you let things play out. But what we tried to do was basically, again, it's not really generalizable advice, but we tried to basically just play a supporting role to the team to help them do the right actions to maximize the likelihood of recovering the funds. So this was a really huge effort. One of the key players was actually Zach XBT. He was phenomenal. He was very, very quick to basically connect the Munchables team with SEAL 911, which is this kind of security course that's just this public good for the on-chain economy, which is awesome. Connected them. He looped in the different third-party bridges and helped convince them to basically pause their bridging to try to limit the channels in which the hacker could basically siphon off the funds. Mm-hmm. So for us, it was really just a matter of how much of a supporting role can we play to help direct the team to best practices. That was also very interesting because as a core contributor to Blast, my personal desire is to just completely go in and just take ownership of everything and just direct everything. But it's something that was kind of difficult because just as a layer policy, it's we can only ever play a bit of a supporting role. So it's very challenging to navigate from that regard, but fortunately ended up working out in the end. And the Munchable team was able to fully recover the funds.
There was a lot of people saying Blast should roll back the chain. Has that thought ever crossed your mind?
Yeah, the fortunate thing is that we never had to get to that point of like making that critical decision, which I'm just very grateful for. Like that is more so like luck in that regard, that it, like that decision didn't have to be made either which way. I think what I saw like on Twitter that day, it was like the talk of the day, right? And everyone had different perspectives. It was like extremely, extremely polarizing. I would imagine that this is what the DAO fork felt like when people were, involved in it. Just like both sides like, equally like contentious. I thought both sides had like very reasonable arguments. I don't know if I need to necessarily rehash like the arguments from both sides, but basically like there's one which is like this is like immutable, it's like decentralized. Like if you change this policy, then it kind of sets a precedent forever. And there's the other side which is like, what do you mean this is like $100 million? Like do whatever is technically feasible to recover the funds. I think the only thing I can add to the conversation that I think was a bit missed, the nuance that was missed is I think that it's not just a binary point in time decision, but you basically have to factor in time as an additional variable. I think there's a huge difference between Ethereum, like hard forking for a hack in 2014, like a decade after inception, basically, compared to Ethereum hard forking in, like 2016, very early into its inception. So I think the infancy of the layer should be taken into consideration. I think that Ethereum itself probably was significantly better served with the hard fork than if they had been purists and didn't hard fork. Just too many users, like early users, just would have like lost their shirts basically for Ethereum to take off. But by making that difficult decision, I think it allowed the community to recover the liquidity and basically build towards the decentralization where now that sort of hard fork would be unimaginable. But also the ecosystem is so developed that it would be able to it's like it can kind of like survive anything at this point. So I think for Ethereum, it was probably the right decision. I think for Blast, I would have to like do a lot more thinking to be able to be like, this is what we would have done. We were basically the entire day just focused on like supporting the Munchables team to recover. And fortunately, they were able to recover funds before we ever even needed to kind of get into the weeds of that decision.
Do we know if the hacker was actually North Korean?
I'm fairly confident they're not, but led to some like really incredible memes. The memes that day were some of the best that I've seen in my entire time in crypto.
Anything else you want to add, Qiao, to the Blast convo?
Nope. Go ahead.
One thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I can share though, for if you're like a dApp, that has any sort of TVL and you're dealing with any sort of like security incident, well, one is hopefully you take all the precautions to minimize that and hopefully it never happens to you. But I think if you're like a dApp, you're like a founder of that, something that's just like very, very important is just transparent communication with the community during the incident. I think that's an error that I see a lot of teams make, which is like when something bad happens, you try to like hide it. I think it's kind of like a natural instinct, but that's actually like the worst thing that you can do because everyone's going to know that something bad happened anyway. And if you're hiding things or you're not sharing, then people are just going to assume the worst, especially like of you, of the team. But if you're transparent and you're like, hey, like this is the issue, this is like how we're addressing it, that is at minimum just going to help reassure the community that like you're not the ones rugging them and that you're doing everything that you can to help like resolve the situation. That's just in a crisis. That's a common error that I've seen is that people just try to like hide the bad things, which is just never a good idea.
I'm curious, what playbook do you recommend for founders launching a new protocol in terms of audit? So can and should founders launch with or without an audit? If so, with how many audits? Should they do some sort of capped rollout, capping the TVL and rollout? Maybe it's dependent on the type of protocol as well. Curious what you think.
Yeah, I think that it's really a case by case basis thing. And also there's security, not just from like a on-chain perspective, but there's like an OPSEC perspective as well. That is like, that's just like a really, really long conversation that would just take up the rest of this space. But the most straightforward thing is like pretty much always definitely get an audit. It's just not worth it. Unless it's just hard to think of a case where an audit doesn't make sense. You want to go from like a reputable auditor, right? So you have Code Arena is great, Cantina is great, Chainlight is great, Trail of Bits is great. There's many others that are really phenomenal. There's another one that we actually like a lot, but I'm blanking on the name right now, which is really sad because they're also a great auditor. I think they're like the parent organization of Cantina. Does it ring a bell?
No.
No. Yeah, totally fine. But basically, it's just like, just always get an audit. It's just, this is a space where if something works, it can work extremely quickly, right? I think in the case of like Munchables, right? It's like, it was within a few days, 100 million TVL. Another project that really took off very quickly on Blast was Crypto Valleys. And that was from a relatively like unknown team. I think they only had like 2 or 3 people working on it, and they just kind of like launched it. It's like, they didn't have like a huge budget or anything like that. They didn't like raise VC or anything like that. It just like took off organically. And then it became like very popular very quickly. And I think the thing that's different about Web3 versus Web2 is that in Web3, when things work, it works like extremely quickly and extremely well. And the numbers get really big, really fast. So given that environment, it's basically always a good idea to get an audit first.
Was this Spearbit?
Spearbit. Yeah. That's the other one. Yeah. Really big fan of Spearbit as well.
We have a number of teams that have launched on Blast, and the positive feedback that they gave me was the fact that you and team are very proactive on security, so much so that they're actively like monitoring their smart contracts and things like that for certain types of potential attack vectors. So I thought that was pretty cool to hear from our founders and within lines.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's the most important thing. Like nothing, it's like no matter what your goals are, that's always number one. It's existential, both for you, of course, like as a project, but also just like for the users. It's like the worst thing ever to lose people's like hard-earned money. If it was something that you can't always like control it, but if it's something that you have any agency over in terms of just minimizing the likelihood of an adverse event, I think it's your responsibility to do that. I just can't think of anything else that is like more worthwhile to spend effort or time and money on.
Welcome to Founder Story. Today we have the founder of Top Fantasy, Kippen, on to talk to us about some of his learnings when launching Top Fantasy. Welcome.
Hello, Imran. Yeah, thanks for having me here.
To me, Top Fantasy has done an incredible job of virality and growth. What are 1 or 2 lessons that you could give to people, founders, builders that want to eventually tap into this growth loop?
I think my best advice would be to focus on the distribution and not the product overall. I think it's a mistake that a lot of first-time founders especially will do, just focusing, making sure that the product is perfect, but just ship it and really focus on what matters. So being able to sell it and making sure that people understand what you do, interact with what you do. And then once you have this, you can start like focusing on product, getting all the feedbacks and fixing everything.
Top Fantasy, the UI is unlike any other app that I've used. Was that deliberate in the sense that you wanted to use like the updated UI UX or a very different UI UX as a way for your growth loop? Like how did you think about designing your product, I guess?
I think one of the key components was trying to hide crypto as much as possible. We just want to make it as a game. It's a fun game to play, and we really want people to just have fun with this one. And so really at the heart of fantasy lies this ambition of redefining the intention of gaming finance and social interaction. So making sure that crypto was hidden was really important for us.
With your launch, within 3 months, I would say you launched your product 3 months?
Not even, it's 2 months and a half, something like this. And we started 3 months ago, so we did 2 weeks between.
You hit 40,000 users. How did you do that?
So I think fantasy is quite gutted in terms of distribution mechanism because we are on top of, so maybe I can just introduce fantasy a bit more. Fantasy it's a social trading card games on top of Twitter, where basically all players will earn reward based on their favorite influencers on Twitters. And so we had all these mechanism loops where players were tagging the heroes and heroes were tagging us to know like what hack was that. And so this growth hack really allowed us to go to 10,000 daily active users on the platform quite easily. And then I think at the end, it just matters of, is the game fun to play? And if it is, then people will just tell their friends and make sure that everyone is getting onboarded. We also have like a referral program that is pretty strong and we're using it a lot so that people are getting rewarded if you are onboarding new friends.
And I also noticed that you've decided to build on Blast versus any other layer 2. What were the choices or the trade-offs you reasoned with before you decided to build on Blast?
So Pacman with Blast and Blur showed how he was able to align everyone in terms of incentive and make sure that a lot of people would come. And we knew that the incentive for Blast would be insane. And we knew that it was onto something big. So there was like definitely potential to be one of the first app and to be the flagship app on Blast. That's what we had in mind.
Kibit, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Imran. That was nice.
So we have a few minutes left. A couple of rapid fire questions. And then Qiao, if you have any rapid fire questions. One is Ordinals. What are your thoughts?
I like them.
Could you see Blur ever expanding to Ordinals?
Yeah, we don't, on the contributor side, we don't typically like to project what we're doing, but I would expect over like a long enough time horizon that Blur would be on, multiple chains wherever there's energy.
Got it. Thoughts on Magic Eden's partnerships with NFT collections to create their own marketplaces like Yuga Labs?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just more options for the end users. So I think it's probably good for the ecosystem as a whole, like regardless of like the specific experiment, right? You can think of Blur as an experiment, OpenSea as an experiment, Magic Eden as an experiment, every other marketplace that ever launched in history, right? Whether it was Coinbase Marketplace or LuxRare or X2Y2 or SudoSwap, right? These are all experiments. And I think at the end of the day, these experiments just provide more innovation and options for the end users. So I think it's from that perspective, it's probably like a positive development, just that the experiment exists.
Do you think the points meta is a temporary or long-term part of crypto? Meaning 10 years from now, do you still see startup founders using points?
Yeah, it's hard to predict this. I think that it kind of like almost depends on like how much it gets co-opted by either ineffective or like adversarial actors. In a similar way to like ICOs, like I think if ICOs were purely used by like responsible actors, I think it would have like persisted as like the meta versus like now you don't really, see that nowadays. And I think it's just because it got like such a bad rep. And then because of that, it like snowballed and now there's like legal issues with it. And it's just like a challenging thing to like pull off now. But I think that there was like a different path that was possible where actually ICOs would have been like the persistent meta. Similarly here, I think that with points in their best form are just another tool for incentive alignment. But if it's a team that uses that incentive alignment effectively, then the outcome can be great. If it's a team that uses the incentive alignment ineffectively or adversarially, then it's going to like color the entire thing. I think it's basically like path dependent. But, I think if another angle on this is for the users, like I think if the users also, it's very, very hard as a user because sometimes like teams are just like not transparent or they hide things. So it's very hard to like put this on as a responsibility on the users. And I wouldn't normally do that. But if users are also kind of like more diligent in terms of actually analyzing the different dApps that are using points, and they're like, oh, this dApp is actually like not really farming us, and our contributions are just contributing to protocol, and there's not really any sort of like short-term like user liquidity moving over to the dApps. That's like a good dApp. And then like, oh, this dApp is prolonging their point system indefinitely, and actually they're earning fees the entire time, and they're basically just incentivizing us to basically move all of our money over to them. And that's kind of like more adversarial. And I'm going to stay away from that. I think if users like culturally basically act in that way, I think the points meta would basically be here to stay. I think if users are not doing it and they kind of just like get taken advantage of, like the community gets taken advantage of like enough times, and it's just kind of going to stay away from the mechanic entirely. So I think it entirely depends.
Cool. Qiao?
How do you see the layer 2 landscape play out? Are we going to see maybe hundreds of layer 2s, maybe only a handful of them dominate?
Yeah, I basically expect layer 2s to develop in a similar manner to layer 1s, and that you have, I guess maybe technically there might be hundreds of layer 1s, but really there's only like 3 that are relevant, right? There's Bitcoin and there's Ethereum and there's Solana. And actually there's kind of this like exponential drop off each time where like, Ethereum's like 2 to 3x smaller than Bitcoin, and Solana is like 2 to 5x smaller than Ethereum. And then beyond that, it's like there's kind of like nothing that's like particularly relevant. I think the reason why that happens is just because, especially in financialized markets, there is like a tendency for power laws to emerge and just like concentration, especially just for liquidity. Splitting up your liquidity amongst like hundreds of layer 2s just like doesn't really make sense, similar to splitting up your liquidity across like hundreds of layer 1s. So I would expect that the end market structure for layer 2s to basically be, you have like 1 to 5 relevant ones, but it's really just going to be like there's going to be one primary one and then a second one and then a third one, and maybe they have some differentiation amongst them, which is why they all kind of exist separately. But I would expect it to have this sort of like power law outcome.
What do you think of layer 3s?
I don't particularly think of them at the moment, but with any sort of development, you can never like write it off. The thing about this space is almost like everything that's hyped, when you look under the hood, it's just like, wait, this is the thing that's getting hyped? Like, this is actually like not a great invention. But just because like attention is so valuable in this space, like there doesn't necessarily need to be real underlying innovation for something to have its moment, right? Regardless of what it is. I'm not saying that about layer 3 specifically. I'm just saying that about like anything like broadly in this space. But yeah, I haven't dug into like layer 3s or more so thought about them enough to like have a strong opinion on whether I think it'll be a thing that happens or not.
What do you think is the top 3 most important insights or decisions that led to the success, at least so far, of Blast? To me, the number 1 is yield, but I'm curious what you think.
I think there's 2 things. The first is yield. That's like the most important. That's the reason why Blast is different. And the only reason why it exists is so that new types of applications can be launched that can't exist anywhere else. That is like the reason why we felt it was necessary to create this in the first place. And we wouldn't have, it wasn't like we were like sitting in a room and being like, oh, how do we like launch a layer 2? It was like, oh no, like this is something that needs to exist. And this is why we're doing it. So the entire reason for being is that native yield. Oh, and also like another funny thing is it's just funny seeing like the whole like term native yield kind of be like co-opted, because there's like a lot of different projects or layer 2s that say like they have native yield, and actually it's just like you have like Steve like on the chain. And native yield is specifically that the ETH itself, there's a lot of rewriting and just like architecture that had to be done to enable the native yield to actually happen for the ETH itself, which is like the primary unit of transaction in the on-chain economy. So that's like the first one. And then I think the second one was really just as a developer or user, right? Like as a DApp, like putting on my Blur hat, like as a contributor to one of the most popular dApps on Ethereum, the insight that I experienced was that when we looked at these L2s, we didn't find anything that really resonated with us personally in terms of like how they were just like operating and building out the ecosystem. It seemed suboptimal from a number of perspectives. Of course, like one example was just like we have this like point system that these like other layers like didn't have. Of course, like that's like one angle of it. I think another angle is just like in terms of like everything that we built, like another thing that isn't really talked about as much, but I think over a long time horizon will actually be very important, is that Blast has 100% of the gas revenue redirected back to the dApps. So as a builder, if you actually build on Blast and your dApp gets popular, you can not only monetize off the native yield, but you can also earn gas fee revenue as well. And right now, like on Base and these other layer 2s, like they're printing money and all that money is just going to the foundation. Whereas in this case, it's like, oh, if you built like the popular dApp that is like bringing all of those gas fees, you actually get to earn revenue from that. And that's like a completely new unlock that doesn't exist. And the real thing that we oriented around was like the native yield. But the reason why we even built that was because when we thought through how do you develop a layer, from the ground up, we realized that, for us as builders, that's just something that we would like. So then we implemented it. And pretty much every aspect of a layer, if you kind of like think, you can probably recognize that there's like a lot of different things that can be done better, or at least in a way that resonates with, with us as like users and developers better. And so, I think those 2 things are the primary insights that have led to Blast.
What's the upcoming milestone or development that you are most excited about for Blast or Blur?
I'm most excited about, well, I'll say one for both. They're kind of related. On the Blast side, it's solving that incentive issue that I shared. I think that it's currently just providing this headwind for the entire layer. So really excited to tackle that. I think it's not always possible to like have a solution to these issues. It's like you kind of have to work with like the physics of the system, and sometimes the physics allows it and sometimes the physics doesn't. But it seems like there's like a solution here, which I'm really excited about. And then on the Blur side, there's actually a number of projects that we're working on as contributors that I'm excited about. The one that I will be able to share now is just, of course, like Blur is deploying on Blast. And I'm really excited about L2 NFTs in particular, because I think that it provides a new playing ground. And especially for NFTs on Blast, like we saw with Munchables, I think that was an awesome experiment. I'm excited to see more of that. And I think that there's going to be completely new metas that develop that take advantage of the native yield. And really that can only happen on like L2s generally as well. So really excited for that. There's other things that you'll see as we release.
Where does it all go from here? You mentioned earlier that Blur is going to, hopefully be on every chain that's out there, as an example. And a part of this is also launching on Blast. So where does Blast and Blur play in the future as you're thinking about building both out?
For both projects, I typically, as like an operating perspective, I think of both of them independently as much as I can. And then from there, I think of, potential synergies that are win-win. Because if I didn't think in that way, then I would be like handicapping both projects. So I think about both like independently, and they kind of like, they have both like different trajectories, and they also have some like overlapping stuff, right? Like Blur and Blast is like a good example of obviously something that's like overlapping. And here's where it goes from here. I think that I generally just think the entire on-chain economy is going to expand massively. I think more and more off-chain. In the same way that when the internet first came about, you saw the first things taking off were these like digital native products, right? It was like Facebook, it was social networks, like that kind of stuff. And then over time, we kind of had this like bits to bricks development where it was like, oh, I can click a button on my phone and like a physical car comes like pick me up and transport me somewhere, right? Or I can click a button on my phone and actually a delivery driver will give me like food. And you basically saw this integration of online and offline. I think we're kind of starting to see a bit of this with like RWAs, right? Like, even just like stablecoins are a great example of an RWA. It's like the RWA with like the greatest part market bit. But I think that that's just the beginning. I think we're going to see more of the off-chain economy move on-chain. But like with everything in crypto, that only happens when there's fundamental infrastructure developments and innovations that occur, right? Like every cycle, if you look at it, was kind of powered by some sort of fundamental innovation, whether it was like Coinbase launching for the US, letting people kind of like retail onboard the Bitcoin, whether it was, Ethereum launching and ICOs allowing for like new forms of capital formation. Or in 2020, it was, Uniswap and DeFi summer becoming possible, people realizing all the possibilities there. I think that every sort of key change is enabled by, these like infrastructure developments. And there's a lot of infrastructure improvements that we think are possible, both for the NFT side of things and also just for the general layer side of things. So something that I'm personally really excited about is just from the ground up, having the basically like privilege of being able to kind of like contribute to both and see what we can create.
Awesome. Well, Pacman, thank you so much for your time. And if you're looking to build on Blast, more information will follow. Thanks, everyone. As always, the views expressed in the Good Game podcast are personal to the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of any other person or entity. Nothing here should be construed or relied upon as investment, legal, tax, or other advice. Thanks for listening to Good Game. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.